welcome to Ideas on Track. In the light of the ongoing global pandemic, we will be hosting a series of short conversations around that theme. I hope you and your families are staying safe. Please follow all the recommended guidelines by the public health expert organizations that are responding to the crisis. Do not spread panic and only share information from credible and verified sources. Thank you. This is Ideas on Track coronavirus episode, and I'm Feyi Fawehinmi, who needs no introduction. Welcome, Feyi.
Thanks, Toby.
Yeah, as usual, during the pandemic, your Twitter feed has been very active. I wouldn't say more active than usual, but it's a consistent theme. And I want to explore something you started tweeting about early, which is the various institutional responses to the crisis. Like how democratic states are handling things like information and crisis management, as opposed to states that are less democratic. What are your observations and insights on that?
Well, I mean, it's a fast-moving situation, but I think it was. I think the way I would probably go back and look at all of that is, how many responses have been typically what you would expect. So, for example, you would expect an authoritarian state to behave in a certain way. So I mean, there's stories in China of basically. I read one particularly harrowing story, for example, of some parents stepped out of the house. They left their child who had cerebral palsy inside, and then a lockdown happened, and they couldn't go back, and the child starved to death. So I would not expect that to happen in mainly a democratic state where governments they need the consent of the people. So an authoritarian state can move quicker, and can be more brutal, and can be more brutal. So a lot of it has played as I would have expected. I mean, for example, I won't say I've been disappointed in particular by any democratic state that has gone heavily or authoritarian, for example, and done some things that I did not expect. I mean, France is France, so I mean, they've had soldiers out on the streets for a while now. The president can rule by decree, so they have their own idiosyncrasies, and they've been battling the yellow vests, the gilets jaunes. They've been battling them for a year now. So so I mean, the way Macron moved decisively and they shut everything down and started finding people, brought the soldiers out, is what I would expect. There's nothing. I think one place where I didn't, or with the benefit of better information now, I would say I didn't quite get. I think I gave the small Asian countries, I think I gave them a bit too much credit. So Singapore, Taiwan, and Hong Kong in particular. Now, to be clear, they've done exceptionally well. They've done very well, and they've had the experience of SARS, that basically made them sharper to something like this. So they know that, if something is coming out of China, you shoot and then ask questions later. This is how we need to react. So they have that infrastructure, that institutional infrastructure to react to things like this quicker and better. But there was a variable that I didn't really consider, and this is the fact that over time, between the time that SARS has happened and now, it's a much different world. If the number of Chinese who have passports and can travel abroad increases by 1%, that is tens of millions of people.
Yeah.
So and when you look at over time between SARS and now, over time, a lot of these countries around China are completely dependent on China for tourism, for travel, for so many different things. So what China did that was the variable is that China locked down its people. By locking down its people, it gave quite an important advantage to a lot of these smaller countries, that they did not get overwhelmed. So in the time of SARS, it wasn't that easy. Maybe the number of Chinese who had passports I think it's still under 10%, but maybe in the time of SARS, say it was 4% or something. I think now it's probably closer to 10%. And when you go to places like Thailand, for example, you see that whole parts of industry and all that stuff is dominated by the Chinese, and Taiwan as well, and Hong Kong and Singapore. I mean, there are all kinds of businesses in this place that do nothing but cater to visitors from China. So by locking down its people, China gave these countries quite a significant amount of breathing room. So you can see Singapore. So Singapore could focus on things like, aggressive testing and tracing. And their numbers were small for a long time. So the Singapore numbers were under 100. So basically, they caught one person, they were able to quickly trace all their contacts, isolate them, and all that kind of stuff. Hong Kong too, their numbers stayed low. Same thing with Taiwan. The government was able to move quickly to mobilize people who make masks, who make all this kind of stuff. And, so initially those countries looked very good. They were good. No doubt about it, they were good, but an important variable is that China locked its people down and stopped them from overwhelming its neighbors. They caught, so I mean, you couldn't even move out of certain parts of China. I mean, I think the lockdown at one point affected 760 million people. So those countries, they benefited from that, and you can see now that the restrictions are starting to ease. These countries are now coming under a lot of pressure. So now you can see, for example, was it yesterday, the chief executive of Hong Kong sounded ridiculous when she said that,
Carrie Lam,
when she said that people should not go to bars because when you go to bar, you get drunk, and then you mingle with people and then you might go with somewhere. And, it sounded ridiculous, when she said that. And you're thinking that, is this the person who held down this thing all that while? Again, so you can start to see, and then now Singapore as well, their cases are starting to jump. Taiwan as well, there are grumblings now that cases are starting to go up. I think they all recorded a record number of cases last week. I mean, when you look back, I went back and read some old Taiwan newspapers online and all that, and you see at the beginning of this whole thing, the Taiwanese newspapers were actually saying that, this is going to cost us. As soon as China was locking down people, they were actually complaining that this is going to cost the Taiwanese economy about $1 billion. The fact that Chinese can't come, So I think those countries, undoubtedly, they have state capacity. There's no doubt about that. They are pretty good. I mean, they have institutional memory of what has happened in the past. But China of 2004, 2005, when SARS happened, is a completely different China from today. So I mean, in 2018, for example, I was in Thailand. And I was reading the newspapers, and there was a whole story about how people in the country were so upset they didn't have their elections at the time, but they were so upset at the military leader of Thailand at that time. And what did he do? Basically, there was a ferry, tourist ferry, in one of the resort islands in Thailand, and there was a ferry accident, and I think about 30 people died. I think capsized, that was carrying tourists, and about 30 people died. So it became quite a big issue and a scandal. And then maybe the military leader, he kind of got frustrated, and he now came out and said, the reason why it happened was because that particular ferry was operated by a Chinese operator, which is true, and was catering to Chinese tourists, also true. So he implied that the Chinese had lower standards than local Thai people, and that upset the Chinese so much that tourism numbers literally overnight dropped by about 10%.
Wow.
And immediately jobs were being lost in all these popular Thai places. So the government now went into a panic. So they increased visa-free travel. They expanded it to a number of countries, dropped the fees, basically just to try and make up those numbers. And the Chinese were effectively punishing them that you think you can talk anyhow. So China is a country that can bully all these guys very, very much. And I mean, last time I was in, so I think I was in Thailand about 2016 or 2017, and when I went there, I mean, you could see, we stayed in the resort, and you could see that it was the highest number of visitors were Chinese. They were everywhere. So a lot of these countries are dependent on China for all kinds of stuff. You see it all over. So if China hadn't locked down its people, they would have fled. Because when there's a virus like this, and the fact that the initial response of the Chinese government was bungled, they lied, they obfuscated, they didn't seem to know what they were doing and all that. So people would have fled. I mean, just the fact that there was a rumor that the government was going to lock down Wuhan where this thing happened. I mean,
about a million people.
Yeah. So there was a 3-day lag between when the rumors came out and when about 1 million people ran away. They escaped, So you can imagine if it was worse than that, or they didn't do it in time. I mean, people would have left the country. They would have fled to Taiwan, or I've walked over the border from Shenzhen to Hong Kong. It's literally like a 5-minute walk. So you can imagine if people from China just decided to overwhelm the Hong Kong border. Hong Kong would never, they would have been on a hiding to nothing. So I think that part of it was underrated in terms of the fact that China, wittingly or unwittingly, saved a lot of its competent-looking neighbors by locking down the citizens. But that does not mean that, they were not, So, you can see, again, South Korea seem to have had the singular best strategy that, look, we'll just do mass testing, test everybody, and then basically begin to identify the clusters where this thing is. So, and they were able to respond. So, for example, when they put down when they got a handle on the initial outbreak in the place called Daegu, where that church was, the church that
with the super spreader.
Yeah, with the super spreader, and they sort of isolated that by testing. Basically, testing, as Balaji has been saying on Twitter quite a lot, testing makes the virus visible. It's an invisible enemy, but with testing it, you make it visible. By the time they did that, but then there were sporadic outbreaks in different places. So, for example, there's a giant government complex in Seoul, in the capital, where a lot of the civil servants work. There was an outbreak there, but they were able to respond very, very quickly. So, you see, it's almost as if they could see the virus, because of the way they had been testing, so when there was an outbreak somewhere, they could quickly say, oh, looks like there's been an outbreak. But most other countries can't do that. So you have to give the Koreans that the fact that at the beginning of all this, they were able to realize that actually testing is going to be a big component of how we fight this thing, and they sped up everything that was needed. So basically, Korean industry rose to the challenge, Korean regulators rose to the challenge by quick approval, and Korean manufacturing rose to the challenge by being able to manufacture this test kit. So, that was a superb display by them. Canada, looking again, if you come to the Western Hemisphere, Canada's numbers look pretty good. It looked pretty good because, they are neighbors to a real hotbed of the thing now. America is looking really quite bad now. And
New York.
Exactly. New York is ground zero of the whole thing in the world now. New York, people drive across from Toronto to New York all the time. But Canada seems to have got it under control. And you won't say it's because of its lack of testing. They've done a huge number of tests. This past week, I think they've crossed 100,000 tests. And they've ramped it up in a short amount of time. So by testing 100,000 people, they've only found about 2,000 cases. So they sort of got it under control. So Canada has done well. But I think the overall point in the whole democracy and authoritarian thing is that you really don't need an authoritarian to get a handle of this thing. Democracies move slower, but they are able to do certain things better. They are able to think quicker and working within even harder constraints. The fact that, for example, in the UK, we don't, in Western countries, we don't leave powers, the kind of powers that can shut down an economy is not something that we normally just give to politicians, even when we elect them. It's a different ask. So we vote for a prime minister in the UK, for example, but if he tried to just lock down the country on a normal day, there will be uproar. It's not a power we give him, no matter the size of the majority. So to get that kind of power, it means that, you need permission. You need a different kind of permission. And the only thing that can give you that kind of permission is this kind of emergency that we've had, whereby locking down the country is not that simple or straightforward, and it shouldn't be. For me personally, I think it shouldn't be easy for any democratically elected leader to just say, "Oh, there's a virus, this is going to kill us, and we're going to lock down the whole country." Unfortunately, it just means that you need to have a certain amount of maybe deaths for the public to come around to the idea. So if there had been, say, maybe 2 or 3 deaths or something, and then you say you want to lock down the country, a democracy will find it difficult to do that. An authoritarian might lock down the country even with 0 deaths. Nothing anybody can do. But unfortunately, you need to get the public to come around to the idea that actually there's a clear and present danger here. There's a major threat here, and we have to then lock down the country. And unfortunately, the only thing that probably will get you to that point is, when the number of deaths start to pile up. So I think democracies working in harder constraints than authoritarian countries. But so far so good. They seem to be doing okay. America is probably going to be the outlier, but I still think that because of the nature of America and the nature of their economy, the fact that they don't have the capability to freeze their economy like the Europeans can do, they will come up with a solution. I just think, this is just nothing. I don't have any particular insight. It's just a gut feeling I have that the unique nature of America means that they will find a solution that will be different from what we are seeing elsewhere.
Yeah. So let's delve back to the very beginning a bit. So now you had this situation where there was an infection, the virus has been spreading silently in China, but the local authorities in Wuhan decided to keep it a secret. But on the other hand, after the outbreak, you find that they have a government that could respond very quickly. They can do some state capacity flex, like build a hospital in 3 weeks, lock down hundreds of millions of people. What do you think are the incentives behind China's model and approach to information? That's one. Then secondly, is it really a question of who dominates the economy? For example, in the West, the economy is largely private sector led, but in China, even though there are large private companies, but it's still largely state directed. So is it a question of who really owns the veto, in the balance between society and the state that really determines how a government responds to a crisis of this nature?
Well, okay, so to take your first question, what are the incentives? Well, I think we live in a time where there is an appeal. Authoritarianism has an appeal, and it's almost the natural instinct of people. I think democracy and the fact that leaders who need consent of people who are weak is probably an anomaly. When you take the whole world as a whole, it's probably something that is kind of like an anomaly. It's not common. People, the idea of a strong man who can solve problems, who can solve all this kind of thing, it's probably a lot more common. It's probably maybe the default of people. So we now have a situation whereby there is a giant economy with visible progress that has money, can do various things, can make things happen, and there's a strong man in charge. There's an authoritarian, strong government in charge. So it's what we are seeing, whereby personality. I mean, in the UK here, for example, our last election, quite unusually from previous elections, was pretty much almost a presidential election. We're a parliamentary system, but the personality of Boris Johnson played a part. He carried the party. We are back to the era of big personalities, big characters in politics, and that comes with it's closer to the authoritarian side of the spectrum than anything. So people want. I don't know. I think it's a natural state that people want strong leadership. until obviously until it becomes a problem for them, until it hits them in a way they don't like. But the idea, especially when it's in another country, so you're living in a democracy, for example, that is quite messy, that your leaders spend all the time arguing, they don't seem to get anything done. Infrastructure is crumbling and it takes forever to build it. And then you're seeing this other place where, they want to do something.
It seems to be moving really fast.
Exactly. They want to do something. They talk about it for a bit and they quickly do it, or the leader, so people kind of like that thing. People like that idea. So there's an appeal to it, which is why I've been a bit worried, especially with Western journalists who are praising how China did this. I'm like, look, you're sowing the seeds for. I mean, the seeds might not germinate in the West, but in places like Africa,
exactly.
it's a bigger risk, which is why it's important to acknowledge what the democracies have done and show it in the light of the fact that you don't really need an authoritarian government to get this kind of. I mean, look at Denmark and Sweden, for example. These guys are neighbors, right? Their coronavirus numbers are pretty much almost the same, almost roughly around the same number of cases and roughly around the same number of deaths, and they are doing things quite differently. Denmark locked down. Sweden refused to lock down. Sweden said, it was not necessary. So Denmark shut schools. Sweden didn't. Denmark shut the border, and Sweden was quite upset. But both of them are seemingly arriving at the same numbers by doing things. We'll see how things go in a couple of weeks. But they are arriving almost at the same numbers by doing things different. And this is the kind of thing that makes a democracy work. Is the fact that we can have difference of opinions and we do things differently. But the use of force is not something that is the first tool in the box. It's a nuclear option, really. So but if you don't talk about these things, people will not see that. People in Africa are probably not going to see that. Now, China appears to have gotten over the worst of it. So while the problem is raging elsewhere, the problem has moved to Europe and America now and Africa now. Now China can now appear like a hero in Africa because they've sort of gotten a handle on the virus. They can have spare capacity. So they can now, a month ago, they probably wouldn't have had spare testing kits or equipment to send to anybody. But now they can. So now they're looking benevolent. You see with Jack Ma sending things. Probably couldn't have done that a few weeks ago, but now they can. The pressure is off. They are starting to open up their economy gradually again. So from the point of view of an African country right now, whereby the thing is getting to critical levels, Europe is battling its own fire at the moment, has no time for anybody. America is battling its own fire at the moment, but China is just going to stroll in. So I think at the end of this, China's hold on Africa is going to strengthen. They're going to have a stronger foothold on Africa, and it's going to come with a lot of the other stuff, with the fact that, they are an authoritarian government. And a lot of people are going to see that, to put it in a Nigerian term, who democracy help? As far as any African country will be concerned right now, when we were in trouble, the person who came to our help was China. Whether or not it was China that started the whole problem, and then all that is irrelevant. Right now, the roof is on fire, and the person who brings So I think that is the natural instinct. To go back to your question, the natural instinct, authoritarian has a natural attraction, whereby we then have to beat it out of our system, and it's democracy that helps us to get it out of our system. Now, state-led, state-directed. Well, to be honest, I think the difference is one of degrees. So basically, China can direct industries in peacetime, even when there's no problem. Western countries might not be able to do it, but even now, for example, in the UK, the government has set up a ventilator production group, and it's basically all the car makers and even Dyson. So basically, this is state-directed. The government has given them a prototype of a ventilator to make, and now among themselves, they are working on. So all the industries are working. This is something that will be antitrust in a normal day, on a normal day.
But on that note, sorry to jump in. Isn't that really just borrowing from the East Asian model? I mean, you have Dominic Cummings, who is a big fan of industrialization and saying that UK has to do industrial policy. We just have to try and replicate what the East Asians have done to get our competitiveness back in the light of Brexit and all that. So isn't that really just doing what Asia did?
Well, to an extent, yes. But again, you see a similar thing happening in France. So you see a similar thing with Louis Vuitton, for example, turning over their factory to make, hand sanitizers and all kinds of different industries as well, coming together, working with the government. The same thing is happening in Germany, even in Italy. The government has basically commandeered the ventilator maker, and got them to ramp up production and all that. So it's happening even beyond Brexit. But yes, I think for the UK, definitely, this thing is going to prove to be a kind of dress rehearsal for Brexit in a funny way, for a no-deal Brexit, because, I think we're discovering things here right now that are showing gaps in the economy, in the way we do things. The fact that UK is an open economy and is heavily reliant on manufacturing elsewhere, whereby we've outsourced quite a lot of manufacturing. Only high-end manufacturing remains here and become really a service economy. So, the gaps are starting to show now. Now, for example, getting certain types of equipment is just not possible because everyone is hoarding. Ventilators, for example, on a normal day, we wanted ventilators. The government would have put out the tender and just gone with the cheapest person, which would have been China and all that, and call it a day. But now we're having to make ventilators in-house because we can't get from anywhere else. The Germans are not exporting, the Italians are not exporting, the Chinese are not exporting. So I think it's proving to be an unwitting dress rehearsal for a no-deal Brexit. And believe me, I'm pretty sure that people like Cummings are now, the gaps are showing, all the gaps in the UK economy, the fact that what would happen to us if we got hit by a crisis? Who are we relying on? So, and I think this is one of the places where China will suffer. People will definitely move things out of an area where the state has so much control. I mean, they might move stuff from China to Vietnam or Cambodia, but in that scenario, at least the state will not have the power that the Chinese state has. So I think China will lose a fair bit of business. I mean, we already saw with the Trump tariffs, the fact that a lot of businesses have left China for the neighboring countries. But when the dust of all this is settled, people are going to be quite angry at China, and they will now be viewed in a way that they are a serious risk to the fact that, if we were to hit a crisis, for example, what if there was a war, for example? Our uniforms, our boots, our radio, for all the are they all being made in China? All that kind of stuff. So it's I think this virus is going to it will accelerate things that we already saw signs of those things already in place. More nationalism, more hostility to globalization. Everyone wants to bring stuff. Everyone wants to bring stuff home, produce them. I think this virus will kind of accelerate that. And to your point, because of that strong nexus between the Chinese state, the Chinese Communist Party, and Chinese industry, people are going to view China as a big risk. And when you price in that risk, you start to wonder whether the cost savings match the risk, if you like, So yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about Nigeria for a bit. Of course, we are going to talk about Nigeria. How would you rate our response so far? Okay, so as at yesterday, the NCDC is reporting about 40 cases. My own intuition is that there is probably more because testing is very low. Testing is still about 0.5 per million currently. So, and there's definitely going to be more cases. But from what I'm saying is that I can't really see any direction in terms of what strategy. Are we going to increase testing capacity? Are we doing lockdown? Okay, the government announced yesterday that they are closing all land borders. I mean, I thought the borders were closed before, but who knows? So how would you really rate our response so far? What are we going for, and what do you think we should do? What can we learn?
Okay, so I think the challenge was that basically Nigeria had one bullet in this fight, from the beginning in the beginning, and that bullet was basically prevention. Now, to be honest, I think a lot of the whole talk about African countries are scanning at the airport and all that kind of stuff, I thought it was kind of unhelpful. People just wanting to make the point that African countries were doing, but the fact is that was all they had.
And the narrative kind of ran away.
Exactly, just ran away with itself, and we did that because that was pretty much all that was available. That was all that could be done. Exactly, hope that look, we will stop this thing from coming into the country. We'll just stop and just hope for the best, effectively. But unfortunately, it can only take you so far. You can only go so far with that, and unfortunately, there wasn't really a strategy for phase 2, if you like. That what if this defense is breached? If we were not able to prevent this thing from coming in, what other bullets in the chamber? There was none. And to be fair, there can't be none. There can't be anything. So there's no health system that can be overwhelmed, for example.
Yeah.
Whereby, look at Europe, whereby the whole strategy is basically trying to prevent all this flatten the curve, trying to prevent the health system from it. There really isn't any health system that, that's going to happen. So really, prevention was the number one bullet. Try to stop this thing from getting an aggressive tracing, and then checking. So with the Italian index case, you see that happen quite well. Everything was able to, they were able to, test and trace, find all the guys, contacts, everyone you had come in contact with, tested all of them, and were they under control. The problem is, are you going to shut the borders? Let's say you're going to shut the borders. I don't see how, the fact that people are coming in every day, and the disease was spreading in Europe. People are coming in from Europe every day, so what are you going to do? So there really wasn't any strategy. And I mean, you could see some weeks ago, for example, in February, when the NCDC chair was saying stuff like, we can't waste reagents on testing if the person does not have symptoms. And that kind of like was an alarm for me, because I felt that it looks like there's no. So one thing that could have been done in that time was that while we had time to plan, we could have done maybe everything in our power to get testing ramped up. Again, it would have been difficult because everyone was in the heat of this whole of fighting the virus at the time, and hardly anyone was exporting test kits. And even if I don't know, and obviously, again, Nigeria was fighting two fires at the same time. The fact that the oil price collapsed at the same time as well. So that was probably the best option to ramp up testing capability while we bought time. But unfortunately, all of that. So we're now at the stage where we are pretty much at the mercy of, events. Now, trying to stop this thing from spreading is going to prove challenging. The thing that's basically crept into the seat of power, the seat of government in Nigeria, which is a big challenge, on its own.
Getting infected.
I imagine that it's pretty much shut down the government, now, because they will have to shut down that place and just maybe wait and see, just to make sure that things are, the whole place is clear.
And, so that's another fear. Sorry to cut you. Another fear is that with that trend, because I think there was a letter that leaked yesterday, ironically, where the chief of staff was writing to the speaker that some members of the House of Reps are refusing to get tested. Now, with this thing moving to the seat of power, I fear our capacity, testing and response is going to shift away from the rest of the population.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, just like we do things in Nigeria.
Yeah,
Now,
I mean, Nigeria is still Nigeria. I mean, just to illustrate with an example, I remember some years ago when I was in Lagos. I think it was in 2017 or something, when during the whole Visionscape mess, where where there was refuse all, and where people were complaining they had no bins. Refuse was Visionscape had not supplied bins. They had no bins. Refuse was mounting all over, and I will never forget. I drove down Bodilon and I counted about 20 bins. So basically, all the bins, and around Tinubu's house, there were so many bins, and this is just the way we behave. This is the way we behave. So unfortunately, like you're right. Now that the thing has hit the center of government, testing become even more of an elite thing than it was. So a random person to get tested now is going to be extremely challenging. Although I heard the Jack Ma consignment has arrived, I think today. So 20,000 kits is, although again that comes with its challenges. I don't think, we still need the reagents and all that kind of stuff. So, but at least, theoretically, testing capacity has gone up, so we don't have to prioritize the elites anymore. And then all that, the whole Nigerian factor shows up in ways that will embarrass us. So hopefully, I mean, can get testing ramped up, and then basically, but even with testing ramped up, it's still the same challenges we're going to have. Basically, identify contacts, trace and isolate them. That's it. If people start getting into respiratory trouble, then I fear it's going to be a big challenge.
Yeah. So a bit of a curveball before I let you go. With this coronavirus thing, have you revised your views about why nations fail?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I think I revised. You mean why nations fail? You mean the thesis by Samoglu and Robinson?
Yep.
Yeah. I think, to be honest, even before this, I think I was cold. I had gone cold on them. So they made quite a number of claims that are not quite, they haven't really stood the test of time, if you like. But why nations fail? I still think I'm a culture person. So
okay.
I'm more I'm aligned to Joel Moker's thesis. The culture of growth. That culture plays a big part. Culture plays a big part. Now, obviously, culture is something that why does culture happen? Why does it change? And I mean, it's not a static thing. So why does culture change? Why does culture change in one direction rather than the other direction? So those questions remain unanswered. But I think that I mean, there are some countries that you feel like these guys would do well under any kind of system. So you imagine that there's some countries that even if they had a military rule or they had democracy, they'll still do okay. So I thought but I think once this thing is over, it'll probably be a good time to go back to a lot of what you think. I'll never be an advocate of government stepping in and paying people's wages, but this is a
test of that belief.
Is a test, and when you think about it, this is not a normal recession. This is a recession where we want a recession. Effectively, we want the economy to shut down so that the virus won't spread. So we are basically inducing it. We want it to happen. We want the economy to pretty much come down to a close. And in that scenario, the normal tools of a recession is that, the government steps in and tries to boost demand and all that kind of stuff. But in this case, I mean, what's government going to do? You're not going to boost demand. You can't boost it. I mean, you want the economy to shut down. You want it to be in a deep recession whereby all shops are closed, all the cities are closed, so that the virus has nowhere to spread. So in that scenario, it's ridiculous trying to boost demand, trying to use your normal firepower to boost demand. So it means that we need a completely different approach, and which is where things like paying people to be on ice kind of makes sense, because essentially what you want is that if this thing starts on, say, 1st of March, and then by 1st of June it is over, we want to be able to pick up on the 1st of June where we left off 1st of March. That's pretty much what we're doing, So in that scenario, paying people salary, throwing money at people, just basically paying people to sit at home so they don't have to worry, and that the destruction in the economy is not too much, that we don't collapse too much of the economy, that would then take too much time to kickstart when the virus is over, when we've defeated the virus, so that we can say with a good degree of certainty that the damage lasted 3 months because we wanted it to, and no more. Otherwise, if you allow the economy to shut down without any kind of protections, then we shut down the economy for 3 months, and then we are looking at another 1 or 2 years before we can get back to where we were. So this is a test of the kind of things that I believe that and to be honest, I'm grateful that I live in a society where the government can actually step in and do that kind of thing. So which is why I'm a bit uneasy about the whole shutdown in Africa, in countries like Nigeria. I mean, the government just does not have the capacity to do anything. The government does not even know where Nigerians are, never mind sending them a check. So I hope that there'll be something that prevents the European system being layered on countries who do not have the European society, if you like. Yeah.
All right. Thanks very much, Feyi.
All right. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I hope we all come out at the other side of this pretty fine.
Yeah, I hope so. All right. Thanks. Thanks for giving me.
Yeah.